Lawyers of Reddit, what is the most unethical thing you have seen someone do for a lawsuit and won? Story 1. For a year, I worked for the most unethical attorney I have ever met. Here are my top 2 stories. He took on a client who was injured at work. He sent him to a doctor that he would refer to as a whore. Since the attorney normally did defense work, the doctor came back saying the injury was clearly not work-related. The attorney called the doctor to inform him that he represented the employee and not the employer in this case. The doctor then wrote a report stating that the injury was clearly work-related. One afternoon, the attorney's assistant ran into my room and said I needed to go to the courthouse right away to defend the attorney in a traffic case. The attorney told me he had no run-ins with law enforcement before, had never been ticketed before, and would just like to get supervision. I went in front of the judge and presented this information and got him supervision. I went back to the office, and curiosity got the best of me. I searched his criminal record. It turned out he had another outstanding speeding ticket, and you could see his mugshot for domestic violence. Oh, and he tried to fine me $5,000 for going to a doctor's appointment on my lunch break. At that point, I literally walked out. Story 2. Oh yeah, doctors who are plaintiff or defense whores absolutely exist. Their opinions are basically disregarded by the other side, since everyone knows what's going on. On the defense side, insurance companies blacklist certain doctors who say every plaintiff needs surgery regardless of the objective findings. And, by the way, this treatment is all on a lien with extremely inflated prices that will be negotiated down 50% when the case settles. Or they have a financial interest in their practice, and similarly inflate prices only to negotiate a massive percent down. It's essentially flagged as an audit, and the doctor will be deposed and discredited in the deposition. Same for the plaintiff side when the defense uses a known defense whore doctor. Attorneys talk on both sides, and everyone knows who the whores are. Which makes it more surprising when I see someone using a person who is well known and will be a disaster for their case. Comment 1. I was on a jury in a medical malpractice case. A man being treated for some serious issues died, and his family brought a fairly baseless lawsuit against a couple of his doctors. I was fascinated how all of the plaintiff's experts were from all around the country, and the defense experts were all from local Boston area hospitals. Even more interesting, the son of the man who died was himself a Boston doctor. He had to know the case was baseless, but he was the dutiful son and supported the family, even testifying. I always wonder what kind of professional price he paid for that. Comment 2. Not commenting on the case you are referring to, but in general, it is very difficult to get local doctors to testify against other local doctors. At least in Alabama, an expert testifying against another doctor in a medical malpractice case has to practice in the exact same area of practice and the exact specialty and even subspecialty as the defendant doctor. Once you break it down to specialty, you are usually left with a small pool of local doctors who almost certainly know the defendant doctor personally and have probably worked with them as well. At that point, you are going to have a hard time getting someone to testify on a plaintiff's behalf. Smart defense attorneys will actually use this to their advantage. You think if they could have found one orthopedic from the great state of Alabama to testify against this doctor, just one who thought my client breached their standard of care, that they would be in this courtroom testifying today. Folks, they had to go all the way to Chicago, Illinois, 600 miles away, to find a doctor to tell you that my client was negligent. What does that tell you? Story 3. I started out working for a commercial law firm, advising companies on environmental compliance. We had a client who was a large oil and gas distributor which owned a contaminated site in a populated area. My boss advised the client to transfer ownership of the site to a newly incorporated limited liability company with no assets. That way, when the government ordered the site to be cleaned up, the client wouldn't be liable for the cleanup. I left not too long after that. Story 4. I think the racist and corrupt cop was the main thing that put doubt into the jury's mind. Especially because he invoked his right to not answer whether he planted evidence. Comment 1. There were several points where the state lost the case. The jury visit to Nicole's then OJ's houses after the defense had the chance to completely alter them. Sterilized Nicole's so it looked like a model home with no personalization, made OJ's look like a hero to the black community and a family man. The DNA expert being boring and failing to show how strong the DNA evidence against OJ was another blow. The officer who found the matching glove at OJ's losing all credibility was another key factor. Comment to the OJ case is really interesting. ESPN did a 5-part documentary series on it, and it teaches you a lot about the cultural history of Los Angeles leading up to the case and how it played a major role. There were a few cases of police brutality where the police were exonerated completely prior to OJ, and the districts where those cases were tried were predominantly white and affluent, such as the Rodney King case. The OJ case had a jury of peers from downtown Los Angeles that basically did the same for OJ that those other districts did for the police officers. Then OJ gets sued for the harm of the man who was killed at the same house, but in Orange County loses a ton of money. The jury of your peers plays such a major role on top of what you pointed out. There are lots of revealing and infuriating interviews from the people who let him walk in that series. I suggest you check it out. Comment 3. It really is. The prosecutors had a slam dunk case. You had motive. You had means. You had an eyewitness to OJ leaving. You had his blood at both locations. You had one glove at her house, the other at his. You had evidence of a knife attack perpetrated by OJ. You had DNA. You had a history of domestic violence between OJ and Nicole. You even had OJ attempting to flee, then threatening suicide and all but admitting it on tape. Even with all those aspects you mentioned, they never should have been able to find him not guilty, but they botched it at every point. They didn't focus on the domestic violence. They tried to play the media game against Cochran and Shapiro. They tried to get OJ with little gotchas instead of presenting the fairly simple, easily provable case they had. They played into OJ's defense team's hands at every turn. Touring OJ's house and the crime scene was needless and absurd, and they had to own it because they asked for it. The gloves not fitting was on them because they asked for it. Putting the officer on the stand when they knew his history could hurt them was on them because they asked for it. The DNA evidence, which was poorly understood at the time, should have been the nail in the coffin. Instead, it just raised more questions because their expert couldn't explain it in simple terms. Story 5. Not a lawyer, but my parents got caught up in a slimy lawyer's talons. Basically, they had carpet installed in their house paid in cash, got a receipt and went on with their lives. 7 years later, they got a letter from some law firm saying the company they had installed their carpet never received payment and would press charges if they didn't pay up. My dad, being the paranoid person he is, had kept the receipt and said he'd see them in court. He did some research, found out what the attorney could and couldn't do in this situation, and also found out that the attorney had been working with the flooring company for years, accusing paying customers of not paying and collecting excess money from them under threat of lawsuit. Fast forward to the court date. Dad showed up knowing his rights, with the receipt stating exactly how much he paid and when. The attorney had nothing except a copy of the invoice for my dad's payment that he left in his folder the whole time. Not only did the attorney break almost every rule of court possible, he completely slandered my dad, calling him sketchy-looking and dishonest, even though the receipt was literally right there in front of him, and insisting that the receipt was fake despite having a copy of the invoice. Real shady stuff. My dad lost that case. Before anyone had even left the courtroom, the attorney walked up to chat with the judge, who asked if they were still on for brunch tomorrow. Because it was a super small circuit, this guy had been able to buddy up to a judge to the extent he was allowed to do basically whatever he wanted and still win his cases. A year later, my parents sued the attorney for misconduct and requested an out-of-circuit judge, who essentially told that slimy lawyer to sit down and be quiet when he tried to pull something against the rules. They won that case. Comment 1. As for how he didn't get disbarred, I'm honestly not surprised. In this situation, They have to file a bunch of paperwork and pass a bunch of tests to explain their actions and prove that they're still worthy of keeping their license under board review. Given how lawyers are trained to spin a situation in their favor, it's not surprising he'd be able to stay in practice with little more than a slap on the wrist. Comment 2. You'd be surprised how many county court cases end up with shady, illegal rulings like this. When a neighbor poisoned my dog a few times, she was an outside dog and she snuck onto their property multiple times when they were at work. I then called an officer from the Animal Welfare Agency on them, who forced them to go to a specific vet since the medicine from their own vet they kept giving the dog each time it got sick couldn't be working since it kept getting sick. The vet was close with the officer and euthanized the dog overnight, citing that the owners starved it to death. When it came to the case, evidence was shown that they fed it all the time and treated the dog to great food often. Evidence was shown that they got medicine for the dog multiple times and treated the dog as part of the family. The judge ruled that they were guilty for not getting the medicine to the dog fast enough, not even what the case was about, and they were labeled animal abusers since it was election season, and the judge and district attorney were close friends and needed numbers to seem tough on crime. Story 6. When I was working as a public defender in the Detroit State Court, I routinely saw police officers lie about the existence of video recordings of an event. The law says they have to have the cameras running when they make a stop, but in all the cases I saw, not a single officer was ever able to produce a video. Either the video had malfunctioned, been accidentally deleted after the event, or the camera was broken. It was a weird place to work. The police officers very much viewed the defense lawyers and the legal process as their enemy. I'm sure there were a lot of unjust outcomes as a result. Comment 1. My experience has been similar. On the civil, not criminal side, though, law enforcement officers lie all the time and think they have an understanding of the law when they are completely incorrect. Sometimes I see it on Reddit too, on law enforcement forums or advice forums. I definitely trusted police more before I passed the bar. Comment 2. I had a public defender who was used to plea deals. After the most minor of a fender-bender accident, the angry driver accused me of assault. The second officer on the scene arrested me for assault and resisting arrest. On the stand, he blatantly lied, claiming that I was holding onto a fence and kicking at him. The fence in question was a flimsy white vinyl picket fence. My public defender asked him if he witnessed me assaulting the other angry driver. He said he did not. That was the end of that case. 2 weeks later, the resisting arrest charges were dismissed. The second trial was the other driver's case, and I was found not guilty after both of us testified. The angry driver's wife divorced him. I guess she was tired of living with her always angry husband. I was facing jail time and 3 years probation when I told my public defender to say to the district attorney that there was no dealing with my case. Either the district attorney dismissed all charges or I wanted my trial. It took 11 months of going back every month before I was finally cleared of all charges. I did a slight fist pump when I heard the judge's final finding of not guilty. My public defender was walking on air after the case ended. Comment 3 can confirm. I had a car accident involving a police officer. Another officer showed up on the scene, wrote up the report as if the accident was my fault. I got the report, and it said I ran a red light, there was no evidence of it, and that the officer was running sirens. The dash cam in the patrol car showed his sirens were off when he entered the intersection. I watched the dash cam from the patrol car, saw all the evidence. I called the reporting officer and informed him that I believed he might have been mistaken in the report and that he might want to view the footage. He called a few days later and asked if I had gotten a copy of the footage. Being fairly broke at the time, I hadn't paid the fee for the footage. He then informed me the video system had malfunctioned or something and it wasn't retrievable. Shocking. It was a simple fender bender. No reason really to lie at all. Comment 4. I watched a police officer lie on the stand about smelling a strong odor of alcohol on the driver's breath during a driving under the influence stop, after previously testifying that the car hadn't pulled over far enough so he had to approach it from the passenger side, and the reason he thought it very important to pull the driver over was that the weather was particularly bad, wind so strong that it was raining sideways, and he was soaking wet the very second he got out of the patrol car, and the driver only opened the window an inch or two due to the rain and wind. Now either he was lying through his teeth, or Officer Beagle was able to smell a strong odor of alcohol in the pouring rain and heavy winds through a window only opened an inch or two on the breath of a person seated on the opposite side of the car. You pick. Story 7. A friend of a friend woke up in a hospital. He had no idea what happened, but he was brought out of an induced coma from a bike wreck. The car he ended up under was owned by a lawyer. The lawyer and a police officer forced the doctors to get the man out of a coma long enough to sign a statement when no family was present. The lawyer never mentioned to the doctor that it was he who was driving and not a person he represented. The lawyer then went on to sue for damages on his car by the man and his bicycle. Comment 1. That's some shady stuff right there. Surely there was recourse for the man, right? I know there are medical consciousness ratings. Just because you're awake doesn't mean you're coherent. Could he argue that he was not in an alert enough state to make sound decisions? On a similar note, if you get someone drunk and convince them to sign a bad contract, would the contract hold up in court? And also, the lawyer lied by omission to get what he wanted. Some could argue he intentionally misled medical staff, and possibly also the officer, and was pretending to be someone he wasn't. Also, what was that officer thinking or doing? If someone asked me to come force a doctor to pull someone out of a medically induced coma, they better have a very good reason to do so. I'd be wary of any documents they tried to have said person sign, see my first point, and I'd want to make sure I knew exactly who was asking for these documents to be signed. If the man really was in a coma, how on earth would they have gotten a statement from him in the first place? So many things about this situation would have raised red flags for me. Story 8. Not a lawyer, but some old woman made a very sudden stop without cause and almost caused an accident. My mom got very upset about it, and so did the lady in front of us. My mom had to point out the traffic cameras to get her to stop yelling and drive off. No accident, but she almost caused one on purpose. Comment 1. We had one lady slam on her brakes in front of us after the light had turned green, and we rear-ended her. She got out of the car and started yelling about back pain. It was clearly fraud, but it was still an expensive $700 settlement. People like this make the world a terrible place. Comment 2. I had someone do this to me back in the day. The first words out of my mouth to the outraged driver were, "I don't have insurance." The driver got back in the car and took off. Heh. Comment 3. There were criminal gangs from Colombia, I think, that were doing this, using multiple vehicles in a coordinated way to cause rear-end collisions. Then the passengers in the rear-ended car would pretend to have back and neck injuries. The gang would collect damages, move to another state, and repeat. Until they botched a collision and caused a horrifying car fire that killed a family. A state officer was suspicious, searched nearby states for rear-end collision insurance payouts, and found the gang members. They all got arrested. Story 9. Not a lawyer, but my dad sued his previous workplace for reasons. Long story short, the company's lawyer kept bringing up and suggesting he was guilty of domestic violence. He wasn't at all. She just wanted to make him look bad. Now if you search his name, domestic violence comes up. I thought that would qualify as slander or something, but I guess not. Story 10. Most attorneys are really ethical. Generally, the most egregious ethical violations are lack of diligence or maintenance on a case and general laziness. Now, some lawyers will do some shady stuff like trolling burn wards for cases and things like that. Occasionally, you will hear about a person withholding something that should have been disclosed, but the more underhanded happenings are what some people will do to get a client and hold a client. Hourly billing attorneys often get a reputation for going through unnecessary stuff to increase the retainer and help hit their minimum billable for the year. Lawyers can be really unethical, dealing with other lawyers out of spite. It isn't to win, but just to be a jerk to lawyers and make their lives miserable. Lawyers can be really cool and ethical, or they can be petty jerks. Kind of like any job in life, Story 11 lawyer here. I'm proud of what I do, and believe that I do it the right way. I act in the best interest of my client, and work to get them the best possible result within the parameters of the case. The reality is that our role is adversarial, and so to the other party, you're the bad guy. That's not hard to live with, it's understandable. It's kind of like being a Bears fan and thinking Aaron Rodgers is the devil. The hardest part about the profession is dealing with the reputation given to all lawyers in the field because of the actions of a small percentage of the legal community. This post is evidence of that unfortunate reputation. Please remember that if you read 1,000 unethical stories here, it comes out of a pool of millions of cases handled throughout the country every year. Story 12. Not a lawyer, but would Amber Heard's actions count? She was the one who abused Johnny Depp. She even went as far as cutting off half of one of his fingers. She admitted to this and said that she did it in hopes of advancing her career. Story 13. Not a lawyer, but I know of a pretty messed up case. It's kind of a two-parter. A lesbian woman I knew got married, and everyone thought the two women were happy. Turns out, the lesbian's wife was a con artist who was essentially gay for pay, until her real fiancé, who was on board with this whole plan, had been at his job long enough for benefits to kick in. His employer at the time didn't provide benefits until after at least a year of employment. The real fiancé had been unemployed for a long time, hence the long con with the lesbian woman. She needed to pull the woman in, then get married, so that she could get on the lesbian's insurance, and also to convince her to pay for a phone. Literally, those were the only two reasons the female con artist was with the lesbian: health insurance and a cell phone. Lesbian and female con artist got married at the beginning of summer. So, the real fiancé got his employee benefits about 7 months into the marriage of female con artist and lesbian. Meanwhile, this whole time, the female con artist was cheating, if you could really call it that, since she was never really loyal to the lesbian, with her real fiancé. Once the real fiancé got his benefits, the female con artist told the lesbian, "I was only with you for the insurance and a phone," and left. The female con artist filed for divorce, and the lesbian was told by all law enforcement and every lawyer she consulted that there was nothing she could do about basically getting conned, because, first, the con artist used her real name on all the documents, so the marriage wasn't fraudulent, and second, you would have purchased those things for your spouse anyway, so you have no real damages to sue for. Basically, the lesbian was heartbroken and completely screwed over. Since there were no kids and the marriage lasted less than a year, the divorce was finalized in some ridiculously short time, like a month. It may have been an annulment. Flash forward 2 months later, we got a call from the lesbian's mother. She was on the way to the hospital because she was just notified that the lesbian had reported being attacked and was in the middle of getting a forensic exam done. The story she told the police was that she had been driving down the road and someone posing as a police officer was following her, eventually pulled her over, and assaulted her in the back seat of her own car on the side of a famously poorly lit road. Well, police started investigating. The lesbian's whole story started to unravel when they checked the surveillance footage at a gas station she would have had to pass before turning onto the poorly lit road where the attack allegedly took place. They discovered that not only had nobody been following her, but she was the only car to drive in that direction for over 45 minutes. But her forensic exam came back positive. How could that be, you ask? Police did some digging and found a profile the lesbian had made on some dating site. They got a warrant and found out she had made plans to meet up with some man. They tracked him down, and he told them everything he knew. He had made plans to meet up with this woman, who turned out to be the lesbian, and as they were getting ready to be intimate, and a few times during, she kept asking, "Have you ever had your DNA taken? Ever had it tested? Are you sure you've never had your DNA tested?" Side note, that part shows that no guy ever thinks clearly when he wants to get intimate. Back to the story. Police took a sample of the dating site guy's DNA to test against the DNA from the forensic exam. It was a match, Police figured out that the lesbian faked the attack by hooking up with this man so there would be DNA, said that the person impersonated a police officer as a plausible reason why she would have pulled over where she did, and tried to say it happened somewhere that everyone knew there would be no direct evidence of her being there. The final question remained, why go through all that? Police carefully confronted the lesbian. They didn't want it to seem like they didn't believe her just because she was a lesbian, even though they had proof that she had been lying this whole time. When confronted, she admitted everything, the dating site profile, setting up the man, lying, everything. Police asked her why. She told them about the female con artist and somehow reasoned with herself that if she suffered some sort of tragedy, like an attack, then the female con artist would come back and get back together with her. Like someone who conned you so deeply would really care, even if she really had been assaulted. She was initially arraigned very quickly, and during that time it turned out police had tracked down the female con artist and got a statement from her. For some reason, the female con artist was in the courtroom when the lesbian was being arraigned. Now remember, the fake attack happened just 2 months after the divorce or annulment, whichever it was. This arraignment was maybe a month after the initial attack report was filed, so figure 3 months since they last saw each other as a supposedly committed couple. The female con artist was 7.5 months pregnant. She had gotten pregnant by her real fiancé at the beginning of fall, so she was able to hide it under heavy sweaters and such. She was about 4.5 months pregnant when the original split with the lesbian happened. To this day, nobody knows why the female con artist was there during the arraignment. The prosecution took forever. For one reason or another, there were constant delays both by the lesbian's lawyer and the prosecutor's office where this was happening. They were going to throw everything they could at her because of all the money and manpower spent on the investigation. Plus, it had been somewhat high profile in that town. Charges included manufacturing evidence, filing a false police report, obstruction of justice, and a bunch of others I have forgotten. She was looking at 5 years in prison, easily. Finally, the lesbian got her lawyer to tell the prosecutor that if they didn't let her plead down to some ridiculous misdemeanor, then at trial, they were going to make it look like she was only being prosecuted because she was a lesbian. It was an election year, and the district attorney was terrified of not getting re-elected, so they made the deal. She should have gotten at least 5 years in prison, but got off with a year probation. I know this, especially this last paragraph, because the lesbian's mother, who was paying for the lawyer and should have been offended by her daughter's actions because the mother was an actual attack survivor, called my dad and regularly kept him updated. She was proud of the fact that they basically pressured the prosecutor into a deal. If you don't believe me, message me and I'll give you a link to an article that was published on a news website about it. Story 14 lawyer for 12 years here, specializing in estates and trusts. My client was challenging the will her husband left behind, giving the wife and son an equal split of the sizable inheritance he left behind. The son used to have an opioid addiction but had been in treatment and a program and had been clean for over 5 years. My client hired a private investigator who befriended the son and pushed him to start using again, selling him a few pills on hidden camera. The wife ended up using the video to successfully convince the judge that her husband was under the impression their son was clean when he wrote the will. But since the video showed he still had a serious substance problem, the will could be challenged, and he couldn't be trusted with his inheritance. She got the entire estate, and the son ended up passing away a few years later from an overdose. Story 15. A mother had her 7-year-old daughter lie on the stand. The mother claimed bodily injuries from a motor vehicle accident. She forced her daughter to testify at trial. The mother coached her daughter to say that the mother was in the car at the time of the accident. It became very apparent that the mother was not in the car at the time of the accident because she couldn't recall where the accident occurred or which parts of the vehicles were damaged. Story 16. My psychologist told me about the time he and one of the most powerful lawyers in town were in court. The opposing lawyer was even more of a jerk than this guy. He had to find a weakness in his armor. So upon the opposing lawyer opening his briefcase, Lawyer number 1 noticed it was full of shoe-shining supplies. The guy was obsessed with his shoes. Before the trial, lawyer number 1 greeted the opposing lawyer, and while shaking hands, he accidentally stepped on his foot. The psychologist said he never had to try so hard not to erupt in laughter in court. The opposing lawyer was so flustered because the trial had started and he couldn't shine his shoes that he lost the case. Lawyer number 1's son is my current attorney. Story 17. I'm not a lawyer, just someone who viewed a lawsuit in English class. Basically, some man found a leg, yes, a real human leg, and sued the owner of the leg to be able to keep it. Turns out, finders keepers is an actual law, and the man who found the leg got to keep it. Story 18. I just listened to the latest episode of a true crime podcast, and some lawyer was defending a man who was facing charges for kidnapping and assaulting 2 female hitchhikers. During the trial, the lawyer went to a bar, known for being welcoming to the gay and lesbian community. He was gay himself, apparently, and saw the 2 women, who were set to be witnesses for the prosecution the next day, engaging in intimate contact. So the next day during cross-examination, he brought up their relationship, knowing that the conservative jury would instantly find their credibility questionable. He then managed to confuse one of the victims into admitting that the encounter might have been consensual. This managed to get the defendant off the hook. That defendant later became one of Australia's most notorious serial offenders. His name was Ivan Milat. Story 19. I am not a lawyer, but a man who was a customer for the construction company I worked for at the time was a real piece of work when Hurricane Sandy hit. A tree fell over and hit his son's room, making a hole in the ceiling. He then decided for the family to take a vacation after the storm and to let the hole and tree be for a bit more than a month. This way, there was massive water damage, and the house got labeled as unlivable. He did this so that not only could he collect massive amounts of money from insurance and from the government, but also so he could turn around and sue them for much more money. He got all that money. He had his old house torn down and hired my company to build his brand new, state-of-the-art mansion that he planned. What the company didn't know was that this man was a serial lawsuit filer. He sued everyone all the time. He had a decent paying job, but he made the bulk of his money from lawsuits, it seemed. He sued the bank once for a misfiling and somehow got tons of money from that. He then turned around and sued the lawyer he had for that bank case for not getting him as much money as he wanted. He won that one too somehow. The project ended up being a nightmare. He had 2 people who were not licensed architects writing up his blueprints and getting them stamped by a careless licensed architect who didn't review the blueprints, probably so he could sue later. And when I say careless, the head of my company had to point out how the roof was sticking into the body of the garage and how the steps didn't line up to reach the different floors, among other problems, and then give it back to the customer to have them redo it all. Multiple times, the customer also wouldn't contact the plumber in time to do the work on the days needed, so there were many wasted days. He would not pay any of the bills on time when they were due. We then found out later that they were taking doctored pictures the whole time of the property when our company wasn't on the scene, and calling the town for complaints about trash on his own plot of land during construction, complaining about wood, pipes, metal, and other materials sitting in the back of the property and on the sides, not real trash, so he could sue us later on. As the job was finishing up, it was about 6 months behind schedule due to all these problems and more that were outside of our control. The head of the company I was with was going to a European country for a wedding of their nephew, and that was known before the project was accepted. When they left for the wedding, the customer tried to directly contract one of the subcontractors to take over and do the whole project, which was illegal and forbidden by contract with the subcontractor, and put into motion the whole fake lawsuit against our company. Unfortunately, the company I was with came back to pure hell and arguments, and then pulled out of the project and planned to sue the customer when he refused to pay his next installment and the installment that had been overdue by a month. The house was left in a terrible state for a while, since no one else could work with the specialized new material my company was using on his home. On top of that, the lawyer that our company hired to sue the customer went missing, and they had to find a new lawyer who did nothing for months. So instead, they got paperwork in the mail telling them that the customer was suing them for breaking the contract, which wasn't true, and was actually the other way around. This led to the new business partner betraying the head of the company and stealing money from the joint accounts as they ran away. Ultimately, this led to the head of the construction company closing down their business, their life's work. Because of all the lost money, they never got to countersue the customer, and the customer had to drop the case because they really didn't have anything. In the end, though, they got to have half of their new mansion built for a fraction of the price before getting someone new to finish it up, and they destroyed an honest company in the process.